Meet our protagonist, a dark-haired martial arts prodigy who trains relentlessly despite being the only member of his ducal house unable to wield magic. Talk about being handicapped in a world where magical power is literally measured by feathered crests on your back. He spent his whole life blindly following his father, only to walk right into a brutal ambush in the snowy woods. Naturally, instead of offering paternal support, Dad dismisses him as a mere tool and orders his execution. Left with no choice, our furious hero launches a desperate assault on his own flesh and blood. He manages to land a clean scratch on the patriarch's neck, proving that grit can sometimes trump broken family ties. But before he can capitalize on the momentum, a couple of grinning thugs trap him with glowing red chains and quickly overwhelm his defenses. Bound by glowing chains, the dark-haired swordsman with golden eyes coughs up blood as his arrogant blonde-haired bearded father stands over him with a sneering declaration that a wingless one will always stay wingless. The cold patriarch grabs his defeated son by the hair and coldly claims he never had any use for him, casually dropping the bombshell that even the boy's mother was just a tool who bore the seed for his master plan. Talk about winning Father of the Year right there. Instead of fading into the sweet release of death, our protagonist suddenly wakes up gasping in the freezing snow and realizes with a jolt that his consciousness has somehow migrated into a tiny infant body. He stares up in sheer disbelief at his absurdly small hands and chubby fingers, trying to process the absolute chaos of his bizarre reincarnation. The reincarnated infant lies sprawled in the freezing snow, gasping for air as his tiny limbs burn with unexpected agony. He stretches out his small hand, desperately trying to crawl away before he falls back into the Duke's clutches. Fiskupri, realizing his brutal executioner is walking away, the baby vows revenge against Roderick with his dying breath. He collapses into the snow next to a lifeless woman, worrying that he might be stuck in this helpless infant body for good. Suddenly, a silver-haired man in a dark coat approaches with a young girl in a green dress and picks up the abandoned baby in absolute shock. The blonde-haired bearded duke with red eyes and a magic wing crest named Highfried arrives at a grand castle accompanied by the young dark-haired swordsman with golden eyes, who suspects they are not here for a friendly family reunion. Highfried warns the swordsman to keep his cool no matter what anyone says, but the young man glares back with a sharp, calculating smile. Meanwhile, other trainees are seen practicing in the courtyard, while discussing how Dallas is nowhere to be seen after having his dominant hand crushed. Highfried hands over a sword as they are greeted by heavily armored guards at the entrance gates. At the entrance gate, walking down the red-carpeted hall past grand arched windows, they hear a booming voice echoing through the chamber demanding to know if it has been over 10 years. The Grey Elder, Zenise, Elmheim, addresses Highfried while sitting upon a grand throne inside the council chamber. The dark-haired swordsman drops to one knee alongside Highfried, wondering quietly why Roderick isn't present to handle the assembly. Zenas bluntly explains that Roderick should have already settled the situation personally, instead of letting it become public spectacle. As tension mounts in the room, Zenas declares that they have no choice left but to officially exile the young swordsman from the household. Fired up by the unjust sentence, the dark-haired swordsman clenches his fists and steps forward to argue back. The dark-haired swordsman tries to speak up for his father, but Zenas abruptly slams his cane down and draws a glowing sword. Zenas tells Highfried that he should have proven his loyalty by killing his own child right here in this room. Shocked by the brutal demand, the young swordsman refuses outright and declares he would rather take his own life than harm his child. Unfazed by the defiance, Zenas casually agrees and orders armed guards to execute everyone present, including the swordsman's wife and daughter. Within seconds, shadowy guards drop down into the hall and surround the group, trapping Highfried and the swordsman as blades close in around them. Classic family drama at its finest. The dark-haired swordsman glares directly at Zenas A. Elmheim and taunts him for being a coward, while Zenas furiously dismisses the terrified men as pathetic. Suddenly, a glowing red wing crest flares across the swordsman's back as a massive wave of mana surges around him. Flashbacks quickly reveal his past life as a baby being welcomed by the silver-haired man and young girl, before snapping back to reality as the infant protagonist wakes up in a panic. Several young girls instantly swarm the baby and lift him up into the air, leaving the reincarnated warrior utterly bewildered by the chaotic attention. He tries to squirm away and scrambles across the floor on all fours, desperately crawling for his life while the energetic children chase right behind him, yelling for him to stop. The baby protagonist panics in midair as golden mana spirals around him, screaming in his head that he cannot control his fall and is plummeting straight down. He crashes heavily into a building before realizing with a shock that he has somehow gone back to the past instead of escaping the Duke's house. An elegantly dressed noblewoman holds him close, smiling warmly while stroking his cheek and gently kissing his forehead. A silver-haired man looks on with a calm expression, reaching out a hand as the woman pulls back the baby's clothing to reveal a glowing red wing crest stamped on his body. The infant protagonist stares angrily at the wing crest on his body, wondering why he has it, and mentally cursing the audacity of taking the wings himself. He glares up as a silver-haired man steps forward and reaches out a hand to gently pat the baby's head. The silver-haired man notes that the child is still a fledgling who cannot even fly on their own, declaring that he will take responsibility and take care of him. Suddenly, a swarm of overly enthusiastic children rushes in and accidentally knocks over a young girl with long white hair and a green dress. The baby protagonist watches the chaotic scene unfold with wide golden eyes as the noblewoman holding him smiles warmly, while the other kids crowd around. Hyfried stands before a grand castle with the dark-haired swordsman, gesturing toward the imposing structure and asking if the young man is disappointed by the current position of the Viscount family. The dark-haired swordsman looks around quietly while Hyfried explains that at the Sword Dance Assembly, a social gathering for martial arts noble families, those who show weakness are brutally crushed. Nearby, a red-haired young woman with a purple bow in her hair clenches her fist in frustration, telling someone not to worry about it. As they walk through the gates past gathered nobles, whispering about the family adopting an outsider boy in place of a proper heir, the dark-haired swordsman maintains a calm, composed expression. Hyfried looks back at him to gauge his reaction to the hostile atmosphere, wondering how the young swordsman will handle the pressure. The dark-haired swordsman smilingly tells Hyfried that he is fine with the chilly atmosphere, while Hyfried reassures him with a laugh. Reflecting on his past life where he made his social debut as a disgrace to the Elmheim family, the young swordsman recalls bitter memories before realizing that he is different now that the Seven Wings have returned. He walks forward alongside Hyfried and Alfin, watching hostile nobles from a window above while his golden eyes narrow in quiet determination, as a flashback depicts past sword fights between knights representing the absolute pinnacle of swordsmanship. Another flashback shows a young swordsman displaying glowing wing crests on his hands while effortlessly defeating opponents in the arena. The dark-haired swordsman then raises his own hand to reveal the glowing wing crests once again, confidently claiming that the place feels as overwhelming as ever. Hyfried tells the dark-haired swordsman that he is counting on him to look after Alfin, prompting Alfin to angrily yell that she is not clumsy while the swordsman just laughs it off. Hyfried then places a hand on the young swordsman's shoulder, advising him to use the opportunity to mingle and build some connections. Looking over the balcony railing, the swordsman casually declares that the place is as overwhelming as ever before, mentioning that Furin and Flair wisely chose not to come. He suddenly turns around and walks away from the balcony to go make some friends, ignoring Alfin's frantic questions as she watches him leave. Descending into the hall, the dark-haired swordsman approaches a group of lounging nobles and stands directly in front of a red-haired young man. The arrogant noble leans back with a drink in his hand and rudely demands to know who the swordsman is. Classic, aristocratic hospitality at its finest, right? The arrogant red-haired noble introduces himself as Aster F. Elmheim, loudly claiming to be the dark-haired swordsman's younger brother. He leans back against a lounging friend and taunts Aster, mocking him as the adopted kid picked up by a Viscount family and questioning his audacity to use the Elmheim name. Aster stands quietly with a blank expression, letting insults roll off his back as the surrounding nobles laugh and whisper amongst themselves. Alfin suddenly steps up, glaring daggers at the mocking crowd and angrily declaring that there is no master-servant relationship between the main and branch families. She grabs Aster's arm to pull him away, but he gently stops her, telling his sister to wait as he steps right past her. Alfin's face twists in intense frustration and fury, her expression darkening with rage as Aster moves forward to handle the situation himself. Before Alfin can even finish speaking, Aster suddenly swings a wine bottle and violently smashes it across the arrogant red-haired noble's face, sending a spray of blood and shattering glass flying. The arrogant noble crashes down, while Aster casually wipes a drop of liquid from his lip and realizes it is just grape juice, mocking the guy for acting like a bratty noble. Classic noble pride, getting a literal wake-up call, right? He then casually draws his blade, holding the blood-stained sword with a completely unbothered expression, while the surrounding nobles panic. Flashbacks briefly flare up, showing the silver-haired man protecting young children during past chaos, connecting back to the dark-haired swordsman's intense golden-eyed glare as his mana flares wildly. Hyfried watches the terrifying display with deep concern, wondering if such massive power can truly be controlled. Zenus A. Elmheim sits back and demands to know what is happening in the middle of their conference, glaring at the interruption. The silver-haired man steps forward with a cold stare, while onlookers whisper among themselves, wondering if this gathering is about to turn completely chaotic depending on the outcome. Aster F. Elmheim steps up with a confident grin and draws his blade, proudly displaying his glowing wing crest while mocking the dark-haired swordsman for relying on a mere pattern. The dark-haired swordsman responds with a calm, chilling smile and glowing golden eyes, telling Aster that such loud boasting is a shameful thing he could never do. That casual insult immediately triggers Aster's fury, causing his eye to twitch in rage as he declares that if he wins, the protagonist will become his dog and work to the bone for the rest of his life. Aster leaps into the air with a manic grin and swings his sword downward with terrifying force, while the dark-haired swordsman stands his ground and calmly raises his blade to block the incoming strike. Aster F. Elmheim bears down with his glowing blade, shouting that this is the true power of the four-wing crest, while Alfin watches in pure panic from the balcony. The dark-haired swordsman calmly parries the flurry of blows with his own glowing golden eyes, taunting Aster about his empty threats and demanding to know where all that initial bravado went. Aster swings his sword with frantic speed, but the dark-haired swordsman smoothly deflects every strike while noting how he spent the last 10 years learning magic in a Viscount's household. The blonde-haired man watches in absolute shock as the dark-haired swordsman suddenly leaps into the air and unleashes a massive wave of golden energy right down on his opponent. Aster frantically tries to block the descending onslaught, his face twisting in sudden terror as the overwhelming force crashes directly onto him. Aster F. Elmheim crashes to his knees as the dark-haired swordsman's overwhelming golden pressure completely shatters his arrogant composure. Spectators up on the balcony grip the railing in sheer disbelief, muttering that monsters like that still exist in Elmheim. The dark-haired swordsman casually steps forward and thrusts his blade downward, sending a devastating shockwave that snaps Aster's sword in half. Aster collapses backward into the dirt, staring in utter humiliation as he realizes he has completely soiled himself in front of the entire assembly. The dark-haired swordsman stands over him with a cold glare, casually telling his cousin that next time he should come wrapped in rags so he won't mind getting soaked. Alfin and the silver-haired man watch from above while the dark-haired swordsman calmly sheaths his weapon, bringing an abrupt and total end to the duel. The dark-haired swordsman stands firm with a calm gaze as hostile energy flares around him, and the blonde-haired bearded duke with red eyes looks on in stunned silence. Aster F. Elmheim scrambles frantically across the stone floor toward the duke, crying out for his father while pointing a trembling finger at the protagonist. Aster shrilly accuses the dark-haired swordsman of defying the main family despite being a filthy half-breed, begging the duke to use his immense power to put the defiant upstart in his proper place. The dark-haired swordsman narrows his golden eyes in mounting annoyance as he watches the pathetic spectacle unfold right in front of him. Without a moment's hesitation, he violently slams his hand down onto the stone ground, sending a brutal shockwave straight toward the arrogant cousin. Aster panics and screams in terror as the terrifying force closes in on him, making it pretty clear that whining to daddy isn't going to save him this time. The dark-haired swordsman stands firm with his golden eyes glowing in the dim light while holding his ground against the brutal shockwave. The blonde-haired duke glares down at him with an intimidating aura, demanding to know if he seriously believes that makes him a true member of the Elmheims. The dark-haired swordsman fires back with steely resolve, declaring that he is the son of the Viscount and carrying the pride of a knight and the weight of a household regardless of blood ties. He addresses the blonde-haired duke with a cold edge, pointing out that this confrontation goes far beyond a mere childhood squabble. The blonde-haired duke raises his sword in fury, towering over the young swordsman while onlookers watch from the balcony in tense silence. The dark-haired swordsman calmly states that he simply used his blade to answer insults against the house of the Viscount, while Aster F. Elmheim remains collapsed behind him. The blonde-haired duke glares down in absolute fury, asking if those are the words of his uncle before drawing his sword and taking a stance. The silver-haired man immediately panics and calls out Roderick in sheer terror, while leaping forward to intervene against the blonde-haired duke's fierce attack. Their blades clash violently in mid-air with a blinding flash, sending shockwaves through the grand hall and kicking up thick clouds of dust. Alfin watches in horror with tears in her eyes as the dust clears to reveal the dark-haired swordsman standing battered and bruised with a resolute glare. The dark-haired swordsman tells the silver-haired man that he protected her and the promise just as he intended, prompting a proud reply that he was indeed magnificent. Other nobles look on from the grand staircase, discussing how things could have split the family right in two if not handled carefully. Back at the training grounds, the dark-haired swordsman stands with a wooden sword in a black shirt while trainees watch him closely. He spars intensely, blocking and clashing wooden weapons with Dallas, while onlookers comment on his relentless drive ever since returning from the assembly. Dallas wipes his brow and admits the swordsman's skill is impressive as everyone gathers around. The dark-haired swordsman continues dominating his training matches, effortlessly crushing everyone who steps up to challenge him, while the onlookers whisper in awe about his growing reputation. He reflects on his recent clash at the sword dance assembly, noting that while he made a strong impression, his ultimate target remains Elmheim itself. Realizing that his current strength is still not enough to beat Roderick, he briefly imagines unleashing the terrifying power of 7 wings to test his wasted potential. Suddenly, Alfin approaches him in a red-trimmed outfit, mentioning that father is calling for him as the swordsman looks back in surprise. Alfin jokingly teases the dark-haired swordsman about missing training and tells him she cannot keep going like this before walking away with a bright smile. The swordsman knocks on a grand office door and enters the room where Highfried sits waiting, greeting him with a stern instruction to sit down. Highfried notes that it has been about 10 years since they welcomed the swordsman into the family, and slides a small cushion holding a glowing ruby ring across the table. Visibly hesitant, the swordsman listens as Highfried explains that the Viscount house is in a precarious position and that they cannot leave the next head seat empty forever. Surprised by this sudden revelation, the swordsman questions whether his sisters are okay with this arrangement as Highfried looks on calmly. The dark-haired swordsman mutters that his sister Kudo will definitely be furious since she hates him just for being born a boy lucky enough to have 7 wings, adding that he cannot accept this role because he is still too immature and nearly killed his own sister when he failed to control his magic. Highfried smiles as he sets down a wooden box on the table and reveals the legendary magic swordgram, also known as the magic devouring blade, designed to control 7 wings power. As the swordsman stares in shock at the weapon's hilt, which currently has no physical blade, Highfried explains that this sword of potential is completed by the wielder's own magical power. Highfried pulls the blade out and bites the hilted grip to demonstrate, swinging it with such overwhelming destructive force that a massive shockwave tears through the surrounding landscape and shatters a nearby stone wall. The swordsman watches in stunned silence as Highfried turns back to him and notes that a precaution like this is necessary because the boy tends to break things quite often. The dark-haired swordsman sits in the forest holding the hilt of Graham as glowing magic swirls around him, and nearby trainees look up in shock at the distant shockwave in the sky. Alfin and the other trainees gather outside wondering what just happened, and Flair immediately guesses that it must be Aster causing trouble. Meanwhile, back in the woods, Highfried looks down at the swordsman and warns him that wielding such an extraordinary power with 7 wings will inevitably make him a target for envy, manipulation, and elimination by rivals. Because of these looming threats, Highfried extends his hand toward the young swordsman and offers a partnership to help him survive what is coming. The dark-haired swordsman firmly shakes Highfried's hand and vows to master both his 7 wings and the legendary bladegram. Back at the Grand Estate, the blonde-haired duke stands beside noble women and Alfin to welcome home a red-haired sister in a red jacket and black top. Malfa cheerfully announces her return and sweeps her arms wide for a reunion hug, immediately rushing to embrace Furin, Kudo, and Althin while teasingly demanding a greeting. Kudo playfully scolds her for messing up hair and laughs off Malfa's overly dramatic claims of chivalry, leaving Alfin watching with a deadpan expression. Meanwhile, out in the training woods, the dark-haired swordsman struggles to keep Graham's overwhelming red destructive energy under control as sweat pours down his face. He leaves a massive crater in the ground before Malfa suddenly steps out from the trees to call him out for not showing up to welcome her back. Malfa flashes a grin and questions if it is cold of him to ignore them, noting that he acts as though he thinks he is special. The dark-haired swordsman sweats nervously as he points out that she has been active on numerous missions, prompting Malfa to demand if he turned down the successor offer purely for her sake. He insists that was not his intention and claims he simply felt unworthy yet, but Malfa walks over with her sword resting on her shoulder to complain about everyone being so spiteful. She suddenly swings her massive blade downward with terrifying force, obliterating the terrain and leaving the dark-haired swordsman dodging wildly in shock. He yells out in panic, asking what she is suddenly doing, while Malfa rests her sword on her shoulder again and cheerfully declares that she is coming at him for real next time. She asks if he will make the same excuses when facing an actual enemy on the battlefield, making the dark-haired swordsman blink in surprise at her choice of words. Before he can even process it, Malfa leaps into the air and launches another destructive strike, forcing the dark-haired swordsman to grip his glowing red blade as a fierce aura surges around him to block her onslaught. Malfa aggressively continues her barrage against the dark-haired swordsman, berating him for his lack of magic control while he struggles to keep his footing in the forest. He fires back by mentioning Kudo, noting how she is just as relentless as ever while exchanging blows. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Kudo watches the chaotic sibling sparring match from a window and nervously asks Highfried if it is wise to leave them alone. Highfried calmly reassures her that they won't go overboard, prompting Kudo to sigh in relief. Suddenly, Highfried pulls out an envelope bearing a red wax seal and reveals that they have received a formal summons from the Elmheim main house. Malfa presses her ferocious assault in the forest, taunting the dark-haired swordsman about his refusal and accusing him of trying to run away. He struggles under her heavy blows and grunts in pain as sheer brute strength overwhelms his defenses. She fires back with harsh lectures, declaring that he is third-rate if he can only swing a sword and second-rate if he can only handle magic. He gasps while coughing up blood and stumbles backward from the sheer force of her relentless attacks. She stands victorious over him in the clearing while lecturing him on his shortcomings. Malfa stands over the battered dark-haired swordsman with a sigh, questioning if he truly distrusts his own power or if he is just terrified of going berserk like he did 3 years ago. He widens his golden eyes in shock as he realizes he never even considered that he might have been subconsciously limiting his own magic. He examines his blade and suddenly wonders if it felt unstable all this time, simply because he was trying to forcibly suppress his power. Malfa leaps forward with a furious expression, yelling at him to give all his strength to her as she launches a devastating full-force strike. The dark-haired swordsman manages to knock her powerful blow right back, grinning wildly as he thanks his sister for finally opening his eyes. He feels an unprecedented, inexhaustible reservoir of magic hidden within his 7 wings, while Manhwa grits her teeth and wonders if she is running out of mana. Classic power-scaling breakthrough mid-fight. Because why just train normally when you can have a psychological epiphany while trading heavy blows? The dark-haired swordsman declares that he will no longer hold back and channels a massive surge of glowing red magic through his 7 wings. Manhwa gasps in absolute shock as he completely overpowers her final strike and knocks her unconscious with a massive shockwave. He wakes up hours later, lying in a comfortable bed inside a brightly lit room, and wonders if he is back in his own quarters. Alphen walks over from the window to greet him and casually mentions that Sister Manhwa took her time coming back. The dark-haired swordsman panics and asks what happened to their duel, only for Alphen to explain with a smile that Aster was the one who carried him back here after he supposedly passed out from sheer exhaustion. Alphen pulls the curtains shut while mentioning that Aster claimed she fell asleep right in the middle of their fight, leaving the dark-haired swordsman sitting alone on the bed as he stares in confusion at a glowing weapon left on the floor. The silver-haired man notes that the retired elders supporting the Elmheim house from the shadows hold immense power despite stepping down from their posts. He sighs in frustration while wondering why the elusive elders would suddenly summon the dark-haired swordsman now, after showing zero interest since his adoption. The dark-haired swordsman calmly replies that it is likely because of what happened at the Sword Dance Festival, prompting a flashback to his terrifying childhood survival trial surrounded by glowing red wolves in the snow. High-Fried turns to him with a worried look and asks where he ever heard such stories about the hidden elders. The dark-haired swordsman just shrugs and prepares himself for whatever punishment or exile the main family might throw his way. The dark-haired swordsman casually remarks that he has already prepared himself for punishment or exile, causing High-Fried to question if he is really sure about leaving without saying goodbye. He calmly replies that it is fine, since he was planning to depart once his sisters arrived anyway, figuring Kudo will appreciate the peace and quiet without him around. He glances down at the legendary bladegram resting by his side, noting that Kudo actually helped him get the hang of handling it. Suddenly, Manhwa kicks open the doorway with a dramatic flair and angrily confronts him for planning to sneak away without telling her. She sharply lectures him about the extreme danger of being summoned by the great elders of the main house, warning him that he might not even come back alive. The dark-haired swordsman just smiles and brushes off her concern, prompting Manhwa to point her finger and angrily declare that she hates him because he is a boy with 7 wings. He gazes back with a tender look, thinking that no matter how strong he gets or how much he acts like an adult, she will always be his precious family. The dark-haired swordsman sits on the floor while holding a sealed letter, exchanging parting words with Manhwa. She stands over him with her arms crossed, telling him to make sure he comes back alive so they can duel again. He looks up at her with a soft smile and sincerely thanks her as his sister. Manhwa abruptly turns around and dashes away toward a waiting carriage to depart. The dark-haired swordsman watches her go with a slightly surprised expression as the carriage starts rolling away. She raises her arm high in the air to wave goodbye as the carriage drives off into the sunset.